Obviously, we've heard a lot about how well you've played through training camp. It seemed like tonight you kind of showed that publicly.
Yeah, just came out, played my game.
Shaedon Sharpe! He's got 12 to shoot, and he operates. Step back on that left bit, and nothing but net. Gives to Sharpe, and he knocks down a triple.
Yeah, that's training camp, Shay. That's what it's been. It's been assertion at all times.
Shaden in the front court. 22 for Sharpe tonight.
Buckle up, Kev. I think it's just going to be that kind of year for him.
This is Jeremy Grant, and you're listening to The Briefcase with Casey Holdahl.
Greetings, Blazer fans, and welcome to The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Episode 172 of The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. I'm your host, Casey Holdahl, and the Trailblazers got their 2025 preseason off to a start Wednesday night in San Francisco with a loss to the Golden State Warriors. Though I think if you watch the game, Blazers won the parts of that game that actually mattered. We'll talk about Shaedon Sharpe, who looked just as good as advertised. We've been hearing a ton about Shaedon throughout training camp. Saw a little bit of it at FanFest. Really saw it Wednesday night versus the Warriors. Everything you've heard about Shaedon during training camp, I think he showed in that game has been absolutely true. What that means for the Trailblazers going forward, and a bit of a rough start to the preseason for young Hansen, rookie big men. You expect those kind of things are going to happen. We'll discuss it in this edition of The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Well, Wednesday night's game versus the Golden State Warriors will go down as a 129-123 loss to the Warriors in that first preseason game for the Trailblazers, second preseason game for the Warriors. But the Blazers won the first three quarters, turned the game over to the end of the bench in the fourth quarter. Warriors outscored the Blazers, I think 51. Giving up 51 points in the fourth quarter is not great, regardless of who's out there. But still, parts of preseason is about seeing the guys who are going to play regular rotation minutes, seeing how they're playing as of right to now. And I think from that metric, an incredibly successful start for the Portland Trail Blazers in that preseason game. They led by 16 at the half and 21 at the start of the third quarter. And that's really the part of the game that mattered for the Trailblazers. I don't want to take away anything from the guys who were playing late in the game. Obviously, you know, when they're getting their opportunity to get out there to play in the fourth quarter, that's important. But at least in terms of like what's important for the Portland Trailblazers going forward, what you saw in the first three quarters was the important part. And I thought they looked fantastic against the Warriors' regular starters. I mean, the Warriors both teams played their starters about the same amount of time, about half the game, probably about more like a third of the game. Warriors played theirs a little bit less, but I think part of that was because the Blazers went out and were the much better team. Jrue Holiday, his debut as a Portland Trailblazer looked phenomenal. I thought that, you know, the big thing that the people were talking about, and, you know, Chauncey Billups had talked about it, said he was going to tinker with the lineups. First preseason game, Chauncey goes out and absolutely does tinker with those lineups. I think the assumption was that it's either going to be Shaden or it's going to be Jerami in the starting lineup. Which one is he going to go with? Chauncey decides to take a different direction, starts both Shaden and Jerami, and brings Deni off the bench, which is not something I think a lot of people expected. Thought it worked all right. And again, I think this is Chauncey just trying things out. Like you know, the fact that he was so emphatic that he's like, there's nothing to read into this. I'm trying some things out. You're gonna make some assumptions that I wish you wouldn't make, but I'm just telling you right now that we're just gonna work on seeing how some guys look together and so on and so forth. So that's what he did. And like I said, Chauncey followed through on his promise. And, you know, I think it looked all right. But I think, you know, the main takeaways from that game, as I mentioned, you know, the Blazers, that offense looked great. It looked fluid defensively, just as strong as you would imagine to be. Again, you have Jrue Holiday kind of leading the head of the snake in that defense, if you will, and really looked good. I thought really, you know, looked like a veteran guy playing a preseason game, and really did what he needed to do. I thought Toumani obviously looked fantastic. You know, I've been kind of pounding that drum all offseason and training camp that, you know, what I've seen would lead me to believe that Toumani is kind of taking that next step offensively. Obviously, as a defender, he's already well on his way to being an elite NBA defender. I mean, when you get all NBA defensive honors in your second season, that's a good indication of that. He's only going to continue to improve on that end. And his offense, I think now that he's a little more confident in his game. He's talked a lot about in college and in high school, he was a 4-5 basically, and now he's a 2-3 in the NBA. And so you got to kind of learn how to deal with that offensively. You're not operating in the post. You got to your dribble, your handle needs to be tighter. Obviously, your outside shot, and particularly in the NBA these days, has to be dialed in. And I thought Toumani looked great. Had a really good start offensively to the game. I think he scored 12 points in the first quarter. I think he was like 4 or 5 from three in the first quarter. Tailed off a little bit in the second quarter, and as the game went on in the third quarter. But again, I think I was really impressed by what I saw of Toumani. And again, it's the things that I've been seeing already anyways. And I guess that's kind of the main takeaway I would say from this preseason game, is that a lot of the stuff we saw in that game versus the Warriors tracks pretty closely with, I feel like, a lot of things that we've seen and heard out of Portland Trailblazers training camp. Like it seems like all the Toumani taking a step, Shaden, who we're going to talk about here in a second, having a really nice night, looked phenomenal in that game versus the Warriors. Deni picking up right where he left off. Donovan only played 11 minutes in that game. I don't know if, I mean, it, on one hand, he played basically the same amount of minutes that Al Horford played, and so you look at the box score and like, well, they're just matching his minutes with Horford. But that wasn't really the case. So I don't know if I don't know why he only played 11 minutes. I'm not at all concerned about it, but I did think it was a little odd. Maybe they just want to see more of Hansen. And Dwop also came out, had a really nice game as well. Dwop Reith, man, like, you can't keep that guy down. Like, you bring more guys on the team, Dwop just keeps competing, man. So which you love to see. And Dwop is one of the all-time great guys that I've come across in the NBA as well. So I always enjoy seeing Dwop do well. So again, a really successful first game for the Trailblazers. Again, the fourth quarter, would have been better if they could have held on to win that game. Would have been better if they had not given up a whole lot of points in the fourth quarter. Yeah. But I mean, it just doesn't really matter, not even in the grand scheme, but in the small scheme, it doesn't really matter. If you watch the first three quarters of that game as a Trailblazer fan, I would find it hard to believe that you wouldn't be pretty excited about what you saw. Again, I thought that Jrue only played the first half, but looked really good. 7 assists for Jrue Holiday in that game. A guy who I think is obviously really going to look to his teammates to create for those guys. Defensively, just again one of the best to ever do it from the perimeter perspective. Toumani looked great. Jerami getting the starting lineup. A little rough night shooting for Jerami. I believe he went 2 of 11 from the field. I thought he looked great defensively as well, and same with Donovan. I think Donovan, a guy who is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. Playing the Warriors for big men is just a bad scene for bigs. Like they play a really fast style of play, and their bigs are not kind of traditional bigs. Al Horford. Al Horford is kind of, I mean, it was funny. Well, I don't know, funny, but it was just like, so Al Horford and Jrue Holiday were kind of hanging out at half court before the start of the game, talking surely about their time with the Celtics. And they're kind of like similar. Like Al Horford is like the center version of Jrue Holiday, like guys who are elite veteran players who are still very good at what they do and are on new teams and are able to help new teams. But doing it at a level still, like, despite all their years in the league, that is really still a high level. So like, and it was a fun vision to see those guys together and kind of, again, like, probably talking about their situations and, like, obviously, the situation with the Warriors is a bit different than the situation with the Trailblazers, but, just the idea of kind of going somewhere else and moving on to a new role and taking on new roles and getting to know people and kind of figuring that part out. So I thought that was nice as well. But yeah, and then I thought the bench played pretty well. Obviously, Deni, again, just a guy who, he's so dependable at this point. You know exactly what you're going to get out of Deni. You're going to get like 17 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, a steal, and a block. He's going to do it efficiently. He's going to get to the rim. He's going to play great defense. Like, just a guy who I think you feel, again, going into his second season with the Trailblazers, a bit of a rough start to his season last year. I am not expecting that at all this year, particularly with, the basketball he played this summer, and then just how well he kind of fit into his role and understood his role and what was being asked of him by the Trailblazers coaching staff last year. Going into this season, like, I'm expecting really big things for Deni. I think both Deni and Shaden and Toumani as well too. I think all three of those guys, like, legitimate, like most improved player kind of guys, because I think, I mean, Deni kind of already did it last year. I think Shaden is, if he ends up getting that starting spot, he ends up playing 30 minutes a night. He's gonna make some hay in there too. Also, Blake Wesley, a guy too, I think you absolutely have to mention that game, getting his first run as a Trailblazer as well. And really everything you kind of heard about Blake, about him just picking up full court and just being a really difficult assignment when you're on offense, and him just kind of hounding you up and down the court. He's long, he's tall, he's fast, pushes the pace. He was a guy too who got singled out for praise by Chauncey, and I thought, we saw that in that game. Like again, like this, there's so many guys on this team where you start looking at lineups and thinking to yourself, like, boy, like if sometimes offense might be an issue, but we might be able to hold teams to 80 points if we're putting out our best defensive lineups, because guys up and down this roster who can absolutely get it on the defensive end. And so I thought what Blake did in that game was great as well. And Dwop too. I came in and hit some shots early, and Dwop just always just does what he's going to do. So again, a very good game for the Trailblazers. I chalk that one up as a win personally, even though it's going to go down as a loss. But the parts of the game that mattered, the stuff that you wanted to see in the game versus the opponents that you would want to see it against, I think the Trailblazers absolutely won that one. Let's just go ahead and run down some of the numbers here real fast. Toumani Camara, 14 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, and 2 blocks in 20 minutes. Toumani looked great. He went 5 of 13 from the field. Again, I think maybe he might have missed all of his shots after the first quarter, but a really nice night for Toumani. And again, just kind of taking that next step offensively. If he's really able to become a knockdown shooter from 3, which, I mean, he was 4-9 last night, that really changes kind of Toumani's trajectory, I think, from an offensive perspective. 4 points, 7 assists, a rebound, and 1 turnover. Just 1 turnover for Jrue Holiday. That was the other part too about the Trailblazers in the first half of the game versus the Warriors. Only 5 turnovers. They turned the Warriors over 10 times. Blazers only had 5 turnovers in the first half. I think that's obviously influence of a guy like Jrue Holiday. Blake Wesley also too, showing that, I mean, he only ended up with 1 turnover in that game as well. So for a young guard to come out and play that well in his first game with a new team against a pretty solid team in the Warriors, I think that's a nice little night for him as well. Donovan Clingan, 4 points, 7 rebounds, and a steal in 11 minutes. Like I said, I'm not entirely sure why he only played 11 minutes. Maybe just some management going on there. Not entirely sure, but I'm guessing we'll probably see him play more than 11 minutes versus the Kings on Friday night. I think I said on the other podcast too that we're playing the Jazz twice. We're not. We're playing the Kings on Saturday. I apologize, everybody. Things get muddled sometimes. 14 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists for Deni Avdija in just under 20 minutes. Again, I'd be a bit surprised if Deni is coming off the bench at the start of the regular season. I think that was really more a function of just Chauncey wanting to kind of see some lineups. It's always possible. Chauncey is a guy who, as I've mentioned multiple times, like he's going to do things his own way. He's going to do things the way he sees fit. And if that's kind of the way where he lands, I think he obviously will go that direction if he feels like, bringing Deni off the bench makes sense. But again, I'd be a little surprised if that's the way that things shook out by opening night, but we will see. I would also, as I mentioned, talking about that game on Friday versus the Kings, I think I might have mentioned before, I would fully expect that it's going to be a different starting lineup in that game as well. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a different starting lineup in every single game in preseason this year for the Blazers. And with only 4 preseason games, you only have 4 games to kind of mess with things and see how they look. So I'm guessing that they're going to really kind of experiment in all 4 of those games. So something to look out for on Friday night versus the Kings, which that game, by the way, my understanding is it's not going to be broadcast by the Trailblazers. I'm not entirely sure if the Kings are broadcasting. I think the Kings might be broadcasting it. So, there's that. But my understanding is that we are going to take the arena feed with our radio call and put that on Blazer Vision. That's what I've heard. I assume that is happening. So if you do have Blazer Vision, I believe you will be able to watch that game versus the Kings on Friday night. Though also, if you're in town Friday night at Moda Center, come check out the new video boards. Come see the new look Portland Trail Blazers. Tickets are incredibly well priced and available. So you should come out to that game. But if not, it should be available on Blazer Vision. 8 points, 5 rebounds, 1 assist, 3 steals for Jerami Grant in 21 minutes. Young Hansen. Actually, we're going to talk about Young here in a second. So we'll just we'll leave that for the later segment. Nice little game for Chris Murray too, getting most of his minutes in the fourth quarter. 12 points, 4 rebounds, and an assist for Chris Murray, also in 19 minutes. 9 points and 3 rebounds and 4 fouls and a block for my guy Dwap Reith. So yeah, again, a really nice start. Really I think I'd mentioned this multiple times. Like, I was looking forward to that game more than any other preseason game I can remember in some time, and it absolutely delivered. And one of the reasons why it delivered was because of Shaedon Sharpe, a guy who obviously we've talked about a lot in training camp. Wins FanFest MVP. You see a bit of it in FanFest, but that's an inner team scrimmage, so you don't know exactly what to make of that. But you just heard from everybody basically. If you ask like who's been good in training camp, who stood out, who surprised you, everyone basically has said Shaden, and he goes out and plays the kind of game that really makes you realize that, like, hey, those guys aren't blowing smoke. Shaden has really been good out there. 22 points on 9 of 15 shooting from the field, 4 of 8 shooting from 3, 6 rebounds, 2 assists in 22 minutes, just under 23 minutes for Shaedon Sharpe. And just everything you'd want to see out of Shaden, kind of a few things there. The aggressiveness. I think you absolutely saw a level of attention on the offensive end that you want to see out of Shaden. Obviously has all the skills. And so really it's just about him kind of going out and putting those things together on the court and doing it consistently. And we absolutely saw that on Wednesday night versus the Warriors. He's not forcing anything, but he's being aggressive. And like, that's just the right place you want to be, is where like you're letting the game come to you, but you're also, putting pressure on the opponent to defend you and to make those reads. And then you're able to take advantage of that. And so, I thought Shaden offensively looked so fluid, so smooth. Everything that I've seen out of him in training camp. I don't think I've seen Shaden miss an open shot since the team kind of got together from the workouts that I've been able to watch. And he didn't miss any open shots versus the Warriors as well. The 3-point shot just looks incredibly dialed in. Again, I think last year that was the outlier. I don't think that Shaden shooting 31% from 3 last year did not really concern me, because it felt to me like it was more a product of the situation. And again, maybe like that injury and maybe kind of not getting the right kind of shots, maybe having to volume shoot a little bit more than you would probably like to see. So the fact that he's able to come out and really put it on from the 3-point line as well, I think that's exactly what you're hoping for out of Shaden. Obviously, if you're going to be a guard in the NBA, a scoring guard, like, you got to be able to shoot 3 at a good clip, and Shaden is absolutely going to be able to do that. I thought, again, looked as good in that game versus the Warriors first line. Like, they weren't playing against the backups. They were playing against Jimmy and Steph and Draymond and Moody and Horford, like those. So it wasn't like he was just getting it versus kind of second and third unit guys. Like, he was doing it against team with championship experience and with Hall of Famers on that team. So I thought that was fantastic. Again, the fluidity with which Shaden is playing with right now on the offensive end especially is really unique. Like, I mean, and that's in a league full of guys who are very smooth, like guys who have really honed their craft throughout the years from an offensive perspective. And even through that lens, Shaden looks elite at his ability to get to his spots, to know what he wants to do from an offensive perspective, where he wants to get to, what kind of shot he wants to get to, his ability to score at all 3 levels. Obviously, the 3-point shooting, as I mentioned, was great. His mid-range game, particularly with his athleticism, ability to elevate, phenomenal. Didn't get to the rim a ton, but also didn't really force the issue a whole lot too. And I think we already know what Shaden can do at the rim. So again, just like everything you wanted to see out of Shaden, and particularly for a guy who, for Shaden, it's like everyone knows the talent at the athleticism. It's just like, man, can you just kind of put it all together at the same time and really kind of bring, again, just the level of focus and attention to detail and engagement that you really need in order to be successful in the NBA. And we saw that on Wednesday. And, if that's the kind of player that Shaden can be, if he can take that step in terms of kind of his mentality and his approach to the game, who knows what Shaedon can do. I've been saying it for years that, I feel like Shaedon really has the capability of being the best player on this team and the ability for the Trailblazers to be successful in sooner rather than later. I think for me really comes down to Shaedon Sharpe. And if he's able to be the guy that he was Wednesday night versus the Warriors in a preseason game, that changes Portland's trajectory exponentially. Like it really, he's the kind of player like that you're not able to necessarily get that guy unless you draft him. And the Blazers have him. So if he can kind of remain where he's at, if he can be locked in, if he can kind of take that step from a mentality perspective, then I mean, again, I think it really changes your expectations for what this team can do, and it changes your expectation for the kind of player that Shaedon can be in his career. At 22 years old, he's just getting started basically. And if he can put it all together this season, and again, I think you got a rookie year where he didn't play the entire season before at Kentucky, so that's going to take a little time to get used to. Second season, he gets injured. Third season, has a shoulder injury, plays through it, but then is kind of in and out of the starting lineup as Chauncey kind of tries to get through to him about a few things, particularly on the defensive end. And so you go into your fourth season, the roster is not turned over, but with Anthony Simons leaving, that leaves obviously a lot of shots to take in that starting lineup from the guard position. I think Shaedon is the guy who everyone looks to be like, hey man, take this spot, and I think the way that Shaedon played in that game is exactly what Chauncey is hoping for in terms of when he talks about like, hey, the lineups, yes, I'm the one that decides who goes out there, but really these guys make the decision with their play in practice and in games. If they go out and play the way that they feel like they can play, they're the ones making the decision, not me, because at that point in time, you don't give me a whole lot of choice. And if Shaedon is able to play this season, regular season, the way he played in that first game versus the Warriors, and again, it's a first game, a preseason game, so you don't want to get too far over your skis about it. But what I would say is that since it did show everything that we've kind of been hearing about Shaedon in the offseason and in training camp, I think you can put a little more emphasis on it or a little more importance on it than you would otherwise, because that's what we've been hearing. Like if he just came out and had a nice game in preseason, you're like, yeah, that's awesome. But if you've been hearing like, well, Shaedon's been kind of up and down in practice and, like, we'll see how it goes, then, maybe you kind of you write it off more as kind of a one-off thing. And again, you can do that too. Like I'm not trying to put too much on a preseason game. But the fact that it reflected everything that people have been talking about during training camp, during off-season workouts, I think it just gives it a bit more validity, because it's like, no, that's what people have been saying. We haven't really been able to see it a whole lot. Now we did see it. The first chance he had to show it, he showed it. And so for Chauncey, it's like, hey, if Shaedon plays like that, like I don't have a choice. I have to start him. Like that's what Chauncey was talking about when he's talking about kind of it's the player's decision, not really mine. Like if Shaedon goes out and plays that well throughout the rest of preseason, throughout training camp, it's not really a discussion at that point. Like it's not a debate. Like you have to get him out there. Like there's no two ways around it. And that's what a coach wants, like they don't want to have to make those decisions. They want the players to make that decision with their play and their competition. And so, I think you saw that in that game versus the Warriors from Shaedon. And again, just a whole lot of reasons to be really excited about what he's able to do this season if he's able to become that player. Once again, 22 points, 9 of 15 shooting from the field, 4 of 8 shooting from 3, 6 rebounds, 5 on the defensive glass, 1 on the offensive glass, 2 assists in just under 23 minutes for Shaedon Sharpe. An efficient night, and also really nice defensively as well. I think obviously when you're playing around a lot of great defenders like you are if you're in the Blazers starting lineup right now, you have to elevate your game. Like you can't be like the guy who other teams are looking at like, hey, if we're going to attack someone, it's going to be this guy. And, in some respects, you don't really even feel bad about that, because it's like when you got Jrue Holiday and Toumani Camara being the other two options, it's like, yeah, I mean, both those guys very good elite defenders at this point. Shaedon is not at that level, but I thought he looked good. Like, I thought he competed. I thought he understood where he was supposed to be at. I think a lot of times, some of the complaints that maybe Chauncey would have had last season about Shaedon's defense is just being locked in. And sometimes you're playing with a lot of younger guys too, who are also learning their way. And so that makes it difficult if you're also trying to kind of get better defensively, or you're trying to improve on that end, because, offense, you can kind of go out there and do your thing. Defensively, like, you got to be on a string with everybody else. And so if you're playing with a lot of younger guys, a lot of guys who are kind of in and out of the lineup, a lot of guys who, are maybe kind of haven't been in town for a whole long time, like, it's just a little more difficult to be a better defender. So when you're playing alongside Jrue and Toumani and Donovan, like, you're just going to improve defensively just by being around those kind of defenders and guys who know what they're doing. I guess that's really kind of more what I'm trying to say, is that when you're playing with guys who understand defense, your understanding of defense improves, because you're not having to kind of fill in for other guys who are also making the same mistakes that you're making. You're playing with guys who are not really making a whole lot of mistakes on the defensive end. So I thought in that regard, like, nothing I saw in that game Wednesday from Shaedon on the defensive end would be like, okay, that's going to get you benched, and I think that's, Chauncey was, pretty clear about that last season. First game, it's preseason, it's just one game, but the way that he played defensively in that game would keep him on the court in the regular season. Absolutely. So really great to see that out of Shaedon. I think, again, so many fans, and I think the organization too, have kind of pinned their hopes on Shaedon's improvement, and has shown so many flashes of, like, boy, if this guy, again, if he's able to put it together, there's really no limit to how good this guy could be. Sky's the limit, because he's also an incredible athlete and spends a lot of time in the air anyways. So one game, again, you don't want to make too much of it, but if he's able to do the things in the rest of the preseason that he did in the game versus the Warriors, I think at that point in time, you really start to let your mind wander a little bit. And finally, young Hansen got his NBA career off to a start with the preseason game versus the Warriors. Came off the bench and looked like a rookie in his preseason debut, as you would expect him to, a 20-year-old rookie from China in his debut. And I would say, too, that this is the first time where it's like, I feel like Hansen has, every time that you've seen him, he's exceeded expectations. So U19s exceeded expectations. CBA exceeded expectations. Combine exceeded expectations. Workout with the Blazers exceeded expectations. Summer League vastly exceeded expectations. Wednesday night's game was the first time I would say that where Young didn't exceed expectations with his play, which you would expect to. Like, again, he's 20. He's learning the language, playing against a Warriors team that is difficult for big men to play against anyways. And, I guess he struggled, but I wouldn't even say really he struggled. He just looked like a 20-year-old rookie big man who is getting his first taste of NBA action. 4 points, 4 rebounds, and assist, fouling out in 21 minutes. And 4 of those fouls came in the fourth quarter as well. So at least when the game was still competitive, or at least competitive with the guys who are likely to be in the rotation this season, didn't foul as much. Once it got, again, to when you're playing with a bunch of new guys, two-way guys in the bench, guys playing for contracts, that's when the fouling started to happen, which, kind of going back to what I mentioned about when you're surrounded by good defenders, kind of that elevates your game. When you're surrounded by guys who are, trying to figure things out as well, that's going to result in you also trying to figure stuff out as well, and maybe having some difficulties there, particularly against a smart team like the Warriors. And they were obviously trying to win that game. The end of the Warriors bench is better than the end of Portland's bench. I think you can say that much about the Warriors. I wouldn't necessarily say that the front of the Warriors, at least our starting lineup on Wednesday night, were not better than the Blazers starting lineup on Wednesday night. In fact, they were considerably worse. So there's that as well. But yeah, Young, I would say too that Hansen looked nervous to me for the first time, and I think he probably even admitted as much. A lot of fans obviously playing in front of a sold out crowd at Chase Center. A lot of fans from China in town to watch the game. A lot of Chinese media as well. I think there was at least 10 international media that were a part of Hansen's post-game press conference, and in addition to those of us who cover the team. So I think that's going to have a feel to it. Again, you're playing with guys who are really going to try to put it on you. I think we saw that. I think just get a little tentative. The speed, I think, not necessarily an issue, but it's going to take him a little bit of time to get up to speed. I would say the same thing about Donovan last year in his early season games. Like the quickness of the NBA pace, the kind of the changing of direction, the getting back fast when you're a big man, like those are things that like you got to get those reps in. You got to do it consistently. And you just got to kind of learn how to play at that speed and that pace. Hansen even talked about afterwards how, he needs to continue to improve his conditioning, needs to continue to improve his understanding of English. And that was something he said multiple times too, was that, I think in a situation like a preseason game at the NBA level, obviously his language skills coming along is going to be important. But I think one thing to consider too is just like what it means to play in an NBA game when your understanding of the language and your ability to communicate on the court is a bit limited. And what I mean by that is just like they're going to have to get accustomed to that. Like Hansen's going to have to become accustomed to what it's going to take for him to kind of understand some things, but maybe not understand some other things, and how they're going to be able to get around that, how they're going to have to deal with that throughout the season, because that's going to be something that I would say for at least the first year is going to be an issue. And there was one time I thought it was great. I mean, like Chauncey, really coaching Hansen out there, which I thought was great. There were multiple times when Chauncey was on the sideline, and like Chauncey, when he's coaching and he sees a mistake, like he's a fiery guy, so like he gets a little kind of aggressive about it, but like he always made sure at the end to like praise Hansen, you could tell, and to kind of dap him up a little bit, just to know like, hey man, like it's cool, I'm trying to get through to you here, trying to show you some things. I'm a arch competitor. I've done this at the highest level, so like he coaches like a player, like and so when he was like doing his thing, telling kind of Hansen the mistakes he was making or where he wanted to be. And I'm sure the Hansen's picking up part of that, not picking up other parts of it. I think it's important to also kind of finish off by like support and like praise, and not even just praise even, but just knowing that it's coming from a place that like, hey, I'm your coach and I care about you and I want you to do well. There was one time in particular where I think it was in the third quarter, they called a timeout, and Chauncey went to Hansen in the paint, or basically kind of in the key, and was really like demonstrative about what he was talking about. Obviously, I'm sitting up top of the 100 level, so I can't hear what they're talking about, but like you could just tell that Chauncey was kind of doing this. And then here rushes Chris, the interpreter, from like the tunnel, like dead sprint, like coming out to start interpreting. So I think part of preseason is just kind of figuring out, like, for lack of a better term, like the workflow of like Hansen being on the court and learning and making mistakes and then being corrected, and then trying to also play an NBA game at the same time. So like that part in and of itself is going to take some getting used to. And that's just outside of the skills, outside of the fitness, is just more like what does it take to be successful or to at least make progress while there is some difficulty explaining things, at least verbally. So that's something they're going to figure out throughout training camp. And again, Warriors tough matchup, but it would have been nice to see Hansen go out there and just dominate. I wouldn't have expected that, or not even dominate, but just like, be really, really comfortable. And I would say he looked a bit uncomfortable. Like the first time that I would say seeing Hansen out there looked a bit uncomfortable, because again, like you're playing the Warriors too, it's like, and I think he even mentioned it in his post game. He was asked like, kind of what were your thoughts about, looking over and you're playing against Steph and Draymond and Al Horford. And he was like, yeah, like it felt like it was like a 2K simulation. So, those kind of like NBA moment kind of things too, like particularly for a guy like Hansen, who's coming from the CBA, like, there's going to be a bit of that too. There, I wouldn't say starstruck necessarily, but there's going to be some like, wow, like, 2 years ago, I was, playing in Shandong, and like now I'm in the NBA, and that's a little bit different. And if you play in college, like you're kind of exposed to that a little bit more so than you are playing in CBA. If you're coming from Europe, where the leagues are a little more competitive, again, like you're and a little more open as well, and you're playing teams from different country, and you got the Euro League. That's a different level of competition. CBA, like it's more of a closed league, so like you're not maybe getting exposed to kind of some of the broader players and just styles of play and just the environment that you get necessarily if you're playing in Europe and obviously in the NBA and then the NCAAs as well. So there's a little bit of that I think Hansen's going to have to get used to. But again, nothing that I saw out of that game that made me concerned at all. It just Hansen looked like a rookie big from China. And that's would be kind of my takeaway from that. The one thing I would say though, one he was -1, so not a bad night for playing 21 minutes. Obviously, plus and minus on a game to game basis is not especially useful, but it's not like he was out there and like just like the team was absolutely getting dominated while he was out there. It's just making his way and kind of being nervous a little bit, maybe fumbling the ball a little bit more than you typically would. Again, one thing I would say though, in the fourth quarter, I kind of wish they would have maybe tried to run through him a little bit. Like, if you're already turning the game over to the bench anyways, like I just feel like it would have been cool to maybe see like, one of Hansen's best qualities is his decision making and his ability to create for others and his vision. And I just wish that maybe we would have been able to see that a little bit in the fourth quarter once the game kind of was in a spot where it didn't really matter a whole lot. And again, I don't want to say that necessarily because like it matters to the guys that are playing. But Hansen played 6 minutes, only got one shot, and had 4 fouls and 2 turnovers. I would have liked to have seen him maybe get some more shots. I would like to see again maybe running some plays where Hansen is creating a little bit, trying to get some cutters. On one hand, you understand why, because, that's not necessarily the offensive style of play that they're going to be playing this year. I think Chauncey even mentioned, like, when he was asked, do you feel like Hansen could be a guy who maybe does some playmaking for you this year? And Chauncey was like, well, not really, because they want their second and third unit to play the same brand of basketball offensively that the first unit plays. And so if that's not going to be a kind of high post, let your big kind of make some decisions and run cutters and screens and things like that and pin downs and for looks, like, then you're not going to do it with your third unit. So, I understand why, but like if it's between, I guess I just would have, Javonte Cook gets 7 shots, Caleb Love 5 shots, Sadie Sissoko 2 shots, Rayon Repair 2 shots, Dwop Reith 4 shots, Chris Murray 2 shots, Young 1 shot. I would like to see a little more Young in that equation in the fourth quarter. And like they gave up 51 points, so it's not like anyone was playing especially well in the fourth with Trailblazers. So and like that's the kind of thing too where like Chauncey's the kind of guy where like he can't just let that go. Like he can't be a guy that's like, it's the fourth quarter, doesn't really matter. Let's just try out some new things. Like he wants to win that game. And it was a close game, even though, the Blazers got outscored, as I mentioned, 51-26, good grief, in the fourth quarter. So I'm guessing like the competitive side of Chauncey's like, no, we need to win this game. They only ended up losing by 4 points, 3 points, 4 points, 6 points. I can't do math. So like the game was still close at the end. So Chauncey's trying to win it, I'm assuming. But I think it would have been nice if we could just experimented a little bit with it, but you understand why they didn't. Either way, a very good first start for the Trailblazers. I thought that as far as preseason games go, you really saw a lot of interesting things out of Portland. You saw some things you really wanted to see. You saw some things that confirmed what you've been hearing. And you saw some things that maybe make you wonder kind of what direction they're going to go with some of those rotations as well. So that's kind of what preseason is for. I think a whole lot of reason to be interested in the game on Friday night versus the Kings. And then you get the Warriors here again at home before wrapping up with the Jazz in Utah. So 3 games over the next week, a chance for the Trailblazers to kind of work out some of the kinks again, see if kind of, I think at this point too, like you really kind of track what Shaden's doing in preseason. If he's able to do that in 3 or 4 games, then I think, you start to really fire up the hype machine and start really, again, letting your mind wander about what the season might mean for Shaden. But either way, a very good start. A lot of fun. Hope you watched it. If you didn't, go back and watch the replay. Pretty good game. Shaden highlights are worth watching on their own. And again, as excited as I was for that first preseason game, I'm even more excited after watching that game for the remaining 3 preseason games for the Trailblazers. So, again, just a lot of opportunity to kind of see where this team is at, see if the things we've been hearing are getting displayed on the court versus actual NBA teams, and at least for a first preseason game, we saw that. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Briefcase. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, new additions throughout training camp and preseason. We'll be back soon. Thank you so much for joining me. Shout out to Spirit Mountain Casino. Check them out, Highway 18 and Grand Ronde. Elevate your game. Thank you. Talk soon. Go Blazers.